The moment a store employee decided my handbag made me suspicious, I learned how fast a quiet afternoon can turn into a public humiliation, and I knew you'd want to hear what happened next. I'm a grandmother, the kind who keeps tissues in every coat pocket and extra buttons in a little tin by the stove. I don't go looking for trouble. I go looking for sensible shoes, decent prices, and a little peace. That day, I was looking for a navy dress for a city banquet, the sort of event where you smile until your cheeks ache and pretend the chicken isn't dry. My daughter had insisted I buy something new. "Mom," she said, "you've been giving everyone else your best for years." And I remember thinking, isn't it strange how a family can see your worth clearly, while strangers decide your worth in 2 seconds? The boutique sat on a corner like it was too good for the sidewalk. Tall windows, pale mannequins, and a door that chimed like it wanted applause. I took one breath, squared my shoulders, and stepped toward the entrance with my handbag tucked close. A young employee, early 20s, stiff posture, eager eyes, shifted into my path. He gave me a smile that looked practiced, not kind. "Ma'am," he said, "before you go in, I need you to leave your bag with me." I blinked. Right behind me, 2 women walked in carrying big totes, the kind people use for yoga mats and groceries. Nobody stopped them. Nobody asked them for anything. Just me. So I asked, softly but clearly, "Why only mine?" His smile thinned. "Company rule. Do you know how people hide behind rules when they don't want to admit what they're really doing? A rule becomes a curtain. A policy becomes a shield. And suddenly the person in front of you is not a customer anymore, but a problem." I said, "I'm happy to shop like everyone else. I'm keeping my personal items with me." He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice like he was doing me a favor. "If you want to enter, you'll hand it over." That was the first moment my stomach tightened. Not fear exactly, something older than fear. A warning bell I've learned to respect. I looked at his name tag. Then I looked at the door. Then I looked at the women drifting through the racks like this was normal. And I thought, if I turn around quietly, how many times will my granddaughter learn to turn around quietly too? So I stepped past him. Inside, everything smelled like new fabric and expensive perfume. The lights were bright, the floors too shiny, and the air felt a little colder than it needed to be. I moved toward the dresses, pretending my hands weren't trembling. I chose 2 navy dresses, one plain, one with a modest collar. I held them up against my chest and tried to imagine myself at that banquet, laughing politely with people who say, "We should catch up," and never do. Then I heard footsteps behind me again. I didn't turn. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. But I could feel him there, hovering like a storm cloud that hasn't decided where to rain. I walked to the fitting rooms at the back. A narrow hallway, a row of curtains, and a bench that looked like it had never held a tired person. I chose a room and pulled the curtain closed. I had barely slipped one hanger onto the hook when the curtain twitched. "Ma'am," the employee said from the other side, "I can't leave you unattended." Unattended. As if I were a toddler near an open pool. As if I couldn't be trusted with a zipper and my own dignity. I said, "I'm changing clothes." That is the point of a fitting room. He didn't move away. The shadow of his shoes stayed planted right near the curtain. Have you ever felt your privacy shrink, not because someone touched you, but because they refused to give you space? I pulled the curtain tighter, tried to focus on the dress, and told myself to keep it calm. Calm is armor for women like me. I've worn it through parent-teacher meetings, hospital waiting rooms, and funerals where people say the wrong thing. But calm does not mean silent. I called out, "Please get your manager." A few moments later, heels clicked down the hallway like punctuation marks, sharp and impatient. The manager introduced herself, Brenda Klein, according to her tag, and looked me up and down the way some people look at a stain they don't want to touch. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked. I explained, the demand for my handbag, the unequal treatment, the employee hovering at the curtain. I kept my voice steady, even though my cheeks burned with embarrassment. She listened with arms crossed, then said, "If you have nothing to hide, you'll cooperate." That sentence, right there, is how innocence gets turned into a performance. And I could feel the hallway listening, like the store itself had leaned closer. I asked, "Do you say that to every customer?" She answered, "We respond to suspicious behavior." Suspicious behavior. Meaning what? Shopping while being me? Shopping while being older, darker skinned, alone, and unwilling to hand my bag to a stranger at the door? I swallowed hard. My hands were cold now. Brenda nodded toward the employee. "He'll remain nearby. And before you leave, we'll check your bag." I said, "I do not consent to a bag search by store staff." She sighed, like I was wasting her time. "Then we'll do this formally." Formally. Another word that sounds clean but feels dirty in your mouth. She told the employee to watch me, then stepped away and spoke into a phone at the end of the hallway. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard enough. Suspected theft, uncooperative, yes, send an officer. An officer. I stood there behind that thin curtain, holding a navy dress I suddenly didn't care about, and I thought about my grandson's school pictures on the fridge. I thought about my granddaughter's laugh, bright, fearless, still believing the world will be fair if she is polite. Do you see why my heart broke a little? Because politeness wasn't going to save me here. Brenda returned and spoke loud enough for the nearby shoppers to hear. "Everyone needs to step out. We're closing briefly due to an emergency." Customers shuffled out, confused and annoyed. The doors locked. The boutique became quieter, tighter, like a fist closing. Brenda turned to me. "Now," she said, "we need to confirm you didn't conceal merchandise." I said, "You have no proof I took anything." Her eyes narrowed. "Then this will be easy." Isn't that what they always say? This will be easy, right before they make it degrading? She motioned for the employee to stand near the curtain. I saw his shoes again, too close, and I felt my throat tighten. I said, "Step back. Give me privacy." Brenda replied, "Privacy isn't guaranteed when theft is suspected." And just like that, she tried to erase my humanity with one sentence. A knock sounded at the front door. Heavy. Official. A police officer entered. Mid-40s, strong build, and an expression that suggested he had already decided who I was. He spoke to Brenda first, listening closely, nodding at all the wrong moments. Then he turned toward me. "Ma'am," he said, "they believe you took something." I answered, "And what evidence do you have?" He ignored the question. "We're going to do a search." I asked, "A search of what?" He said, "Your bag and your clothing." My stomach dropped. Not because I had anything to hide, because I knew what it meant when someone with authority decides you're guilty before you speak. I said, "I'm requesting this be handled respectfully and privately." He took one step closer. "Don't make it harder than it needs to be." Harder for who? That's what I wanted to ask. Harder for the person being accused, or harder for the people who want quick obedience? Brenda folded her arms like she was watching a show. The officer pointed toward the fitting room. "Go in there. Do what I say." My voice stayed calm, but my hands shook. "Tell me exactly what you want." He spoke like he was reading instructions. "Remove your outer layer. Take off your shoes. Empty your pockets. Lift your sleeves. Show your waistband. Then we check your bag." Not naked. Not graphic. But still humiliating, because it was forced and unnecessary and done under a threat. I stepped inside the fitting room and tried to close the curtain completely. The employee's hand touched the fabric from outside, stopping it halfway. "We need to see," he said. My voice snapped sharper than I intended. "Let go." The officer said, "Leave it partly open." Have you ever realized, in one breath, that the people around you don't see you as a person at all? I inhaled slowly. I reminded myself, calm is power. Calm is survival. I slid off my cardigan and placed it on the bench. I sat to remove my shoes, fingers clumsy from nerves. I turned my pockets inside out, only tissues and a receipt. I lifted my sleeves as ordered. The officer's voice cut through the thin curtain. Turn around. I turned. Again. I turned again. Now shake out the skirt. I did, cheeks burning, heart pounding. I felt ridiculous. I felt small. I felt angry. And the whole time, Brenda stood there, watching, not once asking if she might be wrong. The officer said, "Bag." I said, "You need my permission." His pause was brief. "Then give it." Do you hear that? Not a request. A demand dressed up as procedure. I handed my handbag out through the curtain opening. He placed it on the bench and emptied it like it was evidence on a table: wallet, keys, mints, reading glasses, a small notepad with my schedule, and a sealed envelope with my name printed neatly on it. Brenda leaned forward. "Check the side pocket." The officer reached in. And then he pulled out a jewelry pouch with the store's logo on it. Inside was a necklace I had never seen in my life. Brenda's face changed instantly: triumph, relief, and something else that made my skin crawl. "There," she said loudly. "That's ours." My mouth went dry. My ears rang. The room tilted in a slow, sickening way. I said, "That is not mine. That was not in my bag." The employee spoke too quickly, too eager. "It came from her purse." I turned toward the officer. "You watched him stand over me. You watched him touch the curtain. You watched this whole thing." Brenda said, "Our cameras aren't working." Power issue. A power issue. Convenient as a locked door at the exact moment you need the truth. I said, "Then call your corporate security. Call maintenance. Check the register logs. Do anything but accuse me with a planted item." The officer's voice turned colder. "Ma'am, you're coming with me." I stepped forward. "No. I will not be bullied into a confession." His eyes narrowed. "Are you refusing to cooperate?" I said, "I am refusing to be framed." Brenda muttered, "She's resisting." The officer reached for my wrist. Cold metal closed around my hands. Not tight enough to injure, but tight enough to announce to the world that I was being handled like a criminal. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I heard a faint voice in my mind, my late husband, always gentle, always steady: "Hold your head up, sweetheart." The officer began reciting my rights, but he said it fast, like he wanted the words out of the way. I listened anyway, because I know something most people forget: even spoken quickly, those words are supposed to protect you. My phone buzzed from the bench where my things lay scattered. The screen lit up with a name that made my heart lurch. I said, "Please. I need to answer that." The officer said, "No." I said again, "Please." Brenda smirked. "She's buying time." The officer hesitated, then nodded once. "Speaker." Quickly. "Speaker." So everyone could hear. So I couldn't control my own voice. I pressed the button with my thumb. A woman's voice filled the tight hallway. "Ms. Hollis? This is the mayor's office. We've been trying to reach you. The mayor is waiting for you." Silence slammed into the room. Brenda's mouth opened slightly, then closed. The officer froze in place. The voice continued, "Your appointment is in less than an hour. Are you okay? You didn't respond to our messages." My throat burned. I looked straight at the officer through the curtain gap and said, quietly, am I okay? He swallowed. Then the woman on the phone asked, careful and suddenly alarmed, "Ma'am, are you in danger?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I said, "Officer, am I in danger?" His face shifted, confusion first, then fear. Another line clicked in. A deeper voice came through the speaker, calm but sharp as a blade. "This is Sheriff Callahan. Officer, identify yourself." The officer stammered his name. The sheriff said, "Remove those restraints immediately." The officer tried to speak, but the sheriff cut him off. "Now." The handcuffs came off so fast they nearly slipped from his fingers. Brenda started talking at once, apologies spilling out like water from a broken cup. The employee stared at the floor. The mayor's aide asked, "Miss Hollis, do you need assistance?" I said, "Yes. And please note this call is on speaker in the presence of the officer and store management." The officer's eyes widened. Because here is the part Brenda and that officer didn't know when they decided I was easy to bully. I serve as the county's chief prosecutor. I had the appointment because I was scheduled to brief the mayor on a community safety initiative. I never lead with my title. I've always believed people should offer basic respect without being threatened by who you are. But in that moment, my job became a mirror held up to their behavior. The sheriff's voice came through again. "Miss Hollis, stay where you are. I'm sending supervisors to that location." Brenda's knees seemed to weaken. She grabbed the bench for balance. The officer's voice got small. "Ma'am. I didn't know." And I said, "That's the point. It should not require a title to be treated like a human being." I stepped out of the fitting room, shoulders back, cardigan in my hands like a flag I refused to drop. I looked at Brenda, at the employee, at the officer. I said, "You thought you were the law inside these walls. You are not. The law is not a costume you put on when it benefits you." Brenda began to cry, but it wasn't the kind of crying that comes from regret. It was panic. The officer rubbed his face with one hand, eyes darting. He said, "I have kids." Brenda said, "I have kids too." I nodded once. "So do I. And I have grandchildren who watch everything I do." Then I said the sentence that had been rising in me since the door chime rang. "What you did today teaches a lesson. The question is, who will you teach it to, your conscience or your children? Respect is not earned by fear, it's owed by default." The sheriff arrived with 2 supervisors. Their presence changed the air instantly. The officer who had barked orders at me now stood stiff, quiet, suddenly aware of every choice he'd made. One supervisor asked me to explain from the beginning. I did. Slowly. Clearly. I described the bag demand, the unequal treatment, the curtain held open, the forced inspection, the necklace that appeared like magic, and the cameras conveniently down. The supervisor's face hardened. He turned to Brenda. "Is this standard procedure here?" Brenda stuttered. We've had theft." The supervisor replied, "That doesn't give you authority to degrade customers." Then he turned to the employee. "Did you place that pouch in her bag?" The employee shook his head too quickly. "No." But his hands were trembling. And I have seen enough lies in my lifetime to recognize the body's confession. They separated everyone, asked questions, and began collecting statements. My heart still raced, but something steadier replaced the panic, resolve. Do you know what I wanted in that moment? Not revenge. Not a dramatic punishment. I wanted accountability that would protect the next woman who walked in with a handbag in hope. Outside, the street looked ordinary. Cars rolled by. A couple laughed near a coffee shop. Life kept moving as if nothing had happened. That, to me, was the cruelest detail. The world doesn't pause when someone is wronged. You have to decide whether you will carry the shame alone, or carry the truth out loud. I drove to my appointment with my wrists aching where the cuffs had been. When I walked into the mayor's office, the aide's eyes softened with concern. The mayor asked, "Are you all right?" I answered honestly, "I'm angry. But I'm focused." He nodded slowly. "Tell me what you need." I said, "I need a response that doesn't depend on who the victim is. Because today it was me, with a phone call that changed the power in the room. Tomorrow it could be someone with no one to call." That evening, after the banquet, I went home. My kitchen smelled like dish soap and the pot roast I'd left for the slow cooker. Familiar. Safe. My granddaughter sat at the table coloring, tongue stuck out in concentration. My grandson was building something with blocks, determined to make it taller than himself. My daughter took one look at my face and whispered, "Mom, what happened?" I told her the truth in pieces, gentle enough for the children not to hear the worst of it, but honest enough that she wouldn't try to polish it into something easier. My daughter's eyes filled. "They handcuffed you?" I nodded. My grandson looked up. "Grandma, did you do something bad?" "Oh, sweetheart. That question is a knife when it comes from a child who still believes adults always play fair." I knelt beside him and said, "No. Sometimes people decide you're guilty before they listen." My granddaughter frowned. "Why?" And there it was again, why? Why do some people choose suspicion like it's the default? Why do they treat dignity as something you can lose at the front door? I said, "Because they think they can." My daughter squeezed my shoulder. "And what will you do?" I looked at my grandchildren and said, "I will make sure this doesn't become normal." Shame grows in silence, but it shrinks in daylight. The next week, my office opened an inquiry into the officer's conduct. The department placed him on leave pending review. The store's corporate office called me, voices suddenly polite, suddenly careful. They offered apologies. They offered gift cards. They offered a statement. I said, "Keep the gift cards. I want training. I want policy changes. I want cameras repaired and audited. And I want every employee to understand what consent means and what profiling looks like in practice." Corporate asked, "What would satisfy you?" I answered, "Responsibility. Not because I'm soft. Because I'm serious. Punishment alone can be a performance too. Responsibility changes behavior. Responsibility protects people." A community meeting was scheduled at the Civic Center. Those old folding chairs filled quickly. People came with their own stories tucked behind their ribs. A teacher spoke about students followed in stores. A young man described being stopped at a mall for matching a description. A mother admitted she teaches her son to keep his hands visible in checkout lines, as if innocence must always be demonstrated. I listened until my throat felt tight. Then I stood. The microphone squealed, then settled. I said, "I'm telling you this because I don't want my story to be rare. I want it to be useful." Do you know what I saw in that room? Exhaustion. Not just anger, exhaustion. The weariness of living in a world where some people have to prove they deserve ordinary treatment. I continued, "If a store thinks it can hold your dignity hostage, the community has to answer. Not with violence. Not with chaos. With standards, documentation, and a refusal to accept humiliation as the price of doing business." After the meeting, a young woman approached me. Her voice shook. "This happened to my aunt," she said. "She didn't report it. She said it would only make things worse." I took her hands and said, "That's what they count on." She swallowed. "What do we do?" I replied, "We keep records. We demand names. We report. And we tell our families the truth so they don't grow up thinking this is just how life works." A month later, the boutique had new signage at the door, a clear policy stating bags would not be seized, and any security concern would be handled with respectful procedures and documentation. Cameras were replaced. Employees attended training. The manager was removed. The young employee was dismissed. The officer faced discipline and mandatory retraining, with supervisors reviewing his reports for patterns. And still, the most important thing happened quietly at my dinner table. My grandson asked, "Grandma, were you scared?" I didn't pretend I wasn't. I said, "Yes." He asked, "Then how did you stand there?" I answered, "Because being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you understand what's at stake." My granddaughter looked up from her coloring. "Grandma, if someone is mean, should I be mean back?" I shook my head. "No, baby. You should be steady. You should be clear. And you should tell someone you trust." She nodded like she was storing that lesson in a safe place. Weeks after everything settled, I went back to that block downtown. I didn't go in to buy anything. I went to look at the door and feel my feet on the sidewalk, to prove to myself that fear didn't own that corner anymore. The window mannequins stood the same way, blank and perfect. I stood there for a moment and asked myself a hard question. If that phone call hadn't come, how far would they have taken it? That's the truth that keeps me serious. So I'm telling you, from one older woman to whoever needs to hear it, your dignity is not a privilege someone can revoke. It is not a reward for compliance. It is not a favor handed out by a manager with crossed arms. Have you ever been followed in a store? Talked down to by someone who assumed you'd accept it? Pressured to cooperate, just to get out safely? If you have, I believe you. And I want you to know you're not alone. And if you're watching this and thinking, "This could never happen where I live," I'll ask you gently, are you sure, or have you just been lucky? Near the end of every story like this, people want a clean ending. They want villains punished and victims smiling. Real life is messy. But here is what I can offer you, a promise that truth, spoken steadily, changes rooms. It changes policies. It changes what children learn at home. And it starts with refusing to let shame seal your mouth shut. If this story stirred something in you, please take a moment to like this video and support the channel Dust of Old Days. It helps these stories reach people who need the reminder that dignity matters. Now tell me, what would you have done at that door? Handed over your handbag to keep the peace, or held on to your boundaries and risked the storm? Because the older I get, the more I believe this: peace that requires your humiliation is not peace at all. It's surrender. And I didn't raise my family to surrender.